editor-in-chief of the Duran Alexander. We have some more Brexit news. EU leaders have agreed on a plan to delay the Article 50 process, postponing Brexit beyond the March 29th deadline. From what I understand, this is mostly the EU leaders dictating to Theresa May their terms. Did I phrase that correct? Have the EU leaders agreed on a plan to delay Article 50? Are they going to give it a couple more weeks? And what are the marching orders that May has received from the EU leaders?
Right. The first thing to say is you're right on both counts. The EU has entirely dictated the terms. What actually happened was that the EU leaders, and there was a split between them, which I'll talk about in a moment, but the EU leaders debated her request for an extension of Brexit. This is the extension that we talked about in our last video. She asked for an extension to the 30th of June. The EU leaders then interrogated her for, I think it was 1.5 hours. She made a terrible impression. She was then asked to leave the room. She was kept outside the room as the EU options for 6 hours.
Can I stop you real quick, Alexander? Who are these EU leaders? Do you know?
Yeah. Yes,
just for our viewers to understand who's interrogating who.
Right. So the EU leaders are the heads of government of the EU. So we're talking about Angela Merkel. Okay. We're talking about Emmanuel Macron. We're talking about Prime Minister Conte of Italy. We're talking about Viktor Orban of Hungary, who apparently did play a role in the discussions.
So to paint the picture, they're all sitting, they're all in the same room discussing this? Is this what's going on?
They're all in the same room. They're all in the same room discussing this with their aides.
Okay.
And Theresa May is outside, and the discussion goes on for 6 hours. And there's a split between the softliners, who are led by Angela Merkel, who want to give the British more time, and the hardliners, now increasingly led by Emmanuel Macron, who've come to see the British as the major obstacle to Macron's plans for further EU integration, who were very unwilling to give the British any kind of extension at all, but who initially spoke about an extension. The most they were prepared to grant was an extension till the 7th of May. Which is considerably shorter than the one that Theresa May was asking. In the end, after much discussion, an agreement was reached between the EU leaders, which was then presented to Theresa May and dictated to her. She had no option but to accept it. The proposal is as follows. Theresa May has until next week to get her deal passed. If it is not passed next week, then Britain leaves the EU on the 12th of April. If it is passed, then Britain leaves the EU on the 22nd of May. The reason it is really extended to the 22nd of May is because agreed with Theresa May that the British would have to pass various legislation to put her deal into effect, and that would take several weeks. But essentially, Brexit Day is now the 12th of April. There is a little wriggle room allowed to the British in the sense that if the British are able to come up with some kind of other proposal before the 12th of April, if the Theresa May's deal is rejected, the EU leaders have said they will look at it, but they have made it absolutely clear that they will not countenance the British being involved in the EU elections, the European Parliament elections in May, if there is still a British commitment to a Brexit, which the British want to see happen anytime soon. Now, general feeling here in Britain is that this timeline is now so tight that it makes a no-deal Brexit probably the most likely outcome. I say probably because, as I said, there is a little wriggle room left, but it is looking as if the hardliners, led by Macron, are now decisively in the ascendant. I say that because the opinion in Britain is that Theresa May is not going to be able to get a deal passed next week.
Okay, so to summarize it very, very quickly again, and this is Theresa May's terrible, terrible deal that she's negotiated.
Yeah, correct.
Okay,
correct.
So she's going to have the opportunity to take it for a vote for a third time, correct?
If she can persuade the Speaker and the House of Commons to allow her. No.
Okay.
And it's not certain she will succeed in doing that.
Okay, so she needs a Speaker. We're talking John Bercow?
We are talking about John Bercow. Or if she can get a majority of the House of Commons to overrule the Speaker. Very difficult.
Okay, and when are we going to find this out, if she's going to be able to table that agreement for a third time?
There's been no clear timetable given, but the likeliest day is Tuesday.
Okay, so Tuesday we may find out, so we'll find out sometime next week. If they vote that deal down for a third time, then it is most likely a no-deal Brexit on the 12th of April. If they pass that deal, then it is a Brexit on Theresa May's negotiated deal on the 22nd of May.
Correct. That's it. That's what's been proposed. This has sent Britain into deep constitutional crisis. There is now talk. In fact, it's more than talk. There is a very reliable source that in the Daily Telegraph, which says that the chairman of the House of the 1922 committee that brings together conservative backbenchers went to see Theresa May and told her that she has lost the confidence of the Conservative Party and should quit.
All right. Do you think that Theresa May will resign? Will she quit?
It's quite possible. I'm sorry to say it is not a certainty. She seems to be trying to dig in, relying on the rule that the Conservatives are out of leadership until December. And what she now seems to be proposing, and this is really incredible to me, is that if her deal fails on Tuesday, she's going to allow the House of Commons on Wednesday to have what are called indicative votes. These are votes whereby MPs are allowed to put forward various Brexit proposals and to see which one gains the most support. Those would include a second referendum.
I was going to say that.
And a second referendum and, incidentally, revoking Brexit. So this seems to be what she's trying to do in order to hang on. I have to say, I find that absolutely terrible. I think it is quite clear, to my mind, that if she can't win on Tuesday, she must resign.
So the wiggle room, the game plan may actually be Theresa May going to try and get a third vote on her negotiated deal, not getting the okay to table that deal for a third vote, and then gathering to all the people in Parliament to push for a second referendum.
Or even the revocation.
Even the revocation. Is that where the EU is leaning towards?
I think there are some people in the EU that there is no question. But it's now quite clear that the hardline integrationists, led by Emmanuel Macron, have decided that Britain, one way or the other, is an obstacle, and they would like to see it removed so that they can press on with their project of full EU integration. What these people are worried about is, quite apart from the fact that a Britain that remains in the EU after voting to leave would be a very difficult partner anyway. What they're worried about is European Parliament elections with a British elections, the British participating in them, bringing Nigel Farage and his new party, which is going to be called apparently the Brexit Party, sweeping the board, forming a large core of support within the European Parliament and leading to people like the hardline Brexiters, led by Macron, losing control of the European Parliament. They don't want to see that happen. They would rather have a no-deal Brexit than risk it.
Okay, so Macron has kind of come to the conclusion that his grand plan to have an integrated federal states of Europe,
yes,
has a much better chance for success without the UK in it. How is Merkel looking at it? Because doesn't Merkel want the same thing? Doesn't she want more integration in Europe? How come she isn't siding with Macron?
Yes, yes, she does want more integration in Europe. She doesn't want it in exactly the form that Macron does, because what Macron wants is EU federal institutions which will impose their decisions on Germany, whereas Merkel prefers a situation rather like the one we have now, where it is Germany, through its own institutions, that gives the orders to the EU and then carries out its integration process, essentially in German interests. Now, I think Merkel, for that reason, in fact, there's no question about this, would rather the British were kept in. So we are seeing a German-French split. It's not a huge split.
Right.
It's not a decisive split. It's a split on this one issue, and it could be papered over if the British came next week or the week after with some sort of compromise on offer. But we will see. Personally, my own view is that Theresa May is going to lose the vote on Tuesday. I should say that when she came back, she made a series of extraordinary speeches, one to the House of Commons, one to the British people, in which she blamed MPs, British MPs, for the crisis, refused to take any responsibility herself, said that Parliament was acting contrary to the will of the people, and implied that the will of the people is to support her deal. Now, that has lost her enormous support in Parliament. Everybody was infuriated by that speech, and it has hardened the likelihood that her deal will be voted down on Tuesday, because it seems that many people who were edging towards accepting the deal have now been made so angry by that speech that they're going to vote against it. So I think what's going to happen is that Theresa May's deal will be voted down for a third time on Tuesday, assuming that vote happens at all, at which point I think that the whole idea of indicative votes, these ideas of floating various proposals, is going to be so unpopular and so unreal with so many people that there will be a concerted move within the British cabinet and the British Conservative Party finally to get Theresa May, who everybody now acknowledges is the primary author of this disaster, to go. I have to say, she should have been told to go months ago, at least in December, perhaps even sooner. Better late than never.
Yeah, better late than never, but she's done so much damage.
She's done.
It was a dereliction of duty. The Conservative Party should have ousted. They should have gotten rid of her.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have to also say that in this situation of crisis that we have now, and we really do have a crisis now, I am inclined to think that with Macron taking the very hard line that he is taking now, the only real way of stopping a no-deal Brexit is not revoking Brexit, revoking Article 50, which I think is a crazy idea, which isn't going to happen. Or I don't think it's even holding a second referendum, agreeing to hold a second referendum. I think it is a general election. And I think that is a real possibility. In other words, Theresa May may be out next week, the government may fall, and another election might be called, with the British coming back to the Europeans and saying, we're going to hold this election sometime in April or May. Can you please give us a little more time until it's out of the way? In other words, a little more time until the well, the 22nd of May. It's by no means certain by now that the Europeans will even agree to that.
Yeah, but what do they gain by that? I mean, okay, I agree. I agree.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah,
confidence in the prime minister anymore.
no,
I think a proper route would be an election because the Conservative Party they also screwed up. They should have
yeah,
taken responsibility and gotten rid of Theresa
yes,
May. The speech that she gave showed what a poor leader she is. I mean, just pure
yes,
cowardice. What a
yes.
poor leader. What a despicable person she is when I saw that speech. But the Conservative Party should have also taken responsibility and shown leadership and gotten her the hell out. But what do they gain as far as Brexit's concerned with an election? I mean, I see
I don't think,
two unrelated things here. An election,
yes,
yes, to put the country in order as it leaves
yes,
the EU, and it's
yes,
leaving the EU.
yes. Right. Well, I'm going to say straight away, I'm not, if you want my own opinion, I think it is highly likely we will see a general election called next week with the government falling. I think it is highly likely that whichever prime minister holds the ring in the meantime, and it can't be Theresa May, will ask the EU for a further extension. And I think it is overwhelmingly likely in that case. I think it is almost a certainty that Macron, who is now in effective control, is going to say no, because he's going to say to the British, look, you cannot hold an election before the 12th of April. 12th of April is the day that the EU Council has said you must leave by. The reason we chose the 12th of April is because the 12th of April is the day when you are required to tell the European authorities whether you are going to be participating in the European Parliament in elections in May or not. We are not prepared to see the European parliamentary elections disrupted by a Britain which is going through a general election and therefore by definition cannot decide whether it wishes to participate in the European Parliament elections or not. The important point to remember is that if Britain commits to participating in the European Parliament elections, it would have to ask for a long EU extension, a long Brexit extension of at least a year. And that is not something that the British have proposed up till now, and which during a general election, no one would have the authority speaking on behalf of Britain to ask for.
They can't organize an election by the 12th
No,
logistically. So
no, it's
that
impossible.
should be
It's
out of the
impossible.
question. But should they have an election either way after the 12th, irregardless of
Yes.
Brexit?
You see, this is the point. This is the point I think we need to make clear. I don't think they can do anything before the 12th of April. They can't organise any. They can't organise a second referendum before the 12th of April. It's all very well talking about revoking Article 50, but revoking Article 50 requires legislation. There is a very complex legislative procedure that has to be followed. It has to go through the House of Commons. It has to go through the House of Lords. It's very difficult to see how that can be done in such a short time. I mean, they would have to cut corners, and I don't personally think it's possible. So I don't think anything can happen before the 12th of April. So if Theresa May's deal is voted down on Tuesday, and if that vote doesn't happen for the procedural reasons we've discussed, because the Speaker won't allow it and the House of Commons won't overrule him, then I have to say the most likely outcome is a no-deal Brexit on the 12th of April. Macron is apparently putting the chances of that happening at 95%.
What if Theresa May does manage to get her deal approved?
Well, if she gets it approved, then it all becomes very simple. Britain leaves with this truly terrible deal on the 22nd of May. And I'm going to again tell our viewers that that is for me a disastrous outcome. a disastrous outcome. I don't think there is any question at all. The House of Commons should vote this deal down, and Britain should leave with a no-deal Brexit on the 12th of April. That is the only outcome to me which makes any kind of sense in this situation.